Whether people were ready for the ELO, I'm not too sure. I think they were lucky in terms of they came out at roughly the same time as Genesis, Yes, ELP, the whole prog rock movement has started.
ELO were experimental. They wanted to use strings, arrangements, interesting lyrics.
You know, it was quite a big undertaking to create this large band, and they pulled it off, you know.
They loaded in such an incredible amount of orchestration, but the fact is it worked. It was symphonic pop.
It was a different sound. It was completely something no one expected.
They mixed Beatles harmonies with heavy rock and orchestral sounds.
Beatles, lots of strings, and very catchy tunes.
They carried it off purely because they had a flamboyance which carried past the oddness.
ELO, the Electric Light Orchestra, really sprang out of the late 60s. I suppose they were, in a way, inspired by the Beatles, because the Beatles showed the way with being songwriting and arranging and album production, set amazingly high standards, and on the way inspired younger musicians to try something in the same field, often using strings. I think was a crucial thing, and that left its mark on a young band called The Move.
What to say? She was running away. So now I'm standing on the corner, lost in the things that I said. What am I supposed to do now? Goodbye, blackberry.
The Move were a band from Birmingham who, in the pop rock circles, for want of a better description, in the late 60s have made a modest amount of impact, thanks mainly to the fact that they had an incredibly talented songwriter in Roy Wood, who was also something of an eccentric.
By the time we got towards the end of the 60s, Roy Wood and the drummer Bev Bevan were the only members of The Move who remained from the original five-piece, which had Carl Wayne singing, Ace Kefford playing the bass and Trevor Burton playing the guitar. Now, The Move had established themselves with a string of very good hit singles, but Roy Wood, on the one hand, was being told to keep The Move going because obviously that was the goose that laid the golden singles, but he wanted to do something else. He wanted to branch out a little bit.
And I remember as a teenager I always find that confusing reading the press. Roy Wood's got a new band and it's called Electric Light Orchestra, and then you sit watching Top of the Pops and he's still performing Move songs, and I was like, what the hell's going on here?
Goodbye, blackberry way. She won't be back another day.
They reached the point where The Move suddenly seemed a bit out of date, and they outlived their image, certainly. And they wanted to move on, literally, and do something that was more artistically credible. The Move brand ceased to be important by the beginning of the 70s. So what happened was the formation of the Electric Light Orchestra out of The Move, comprising Bev Bevan on drums and Roy Wood and Jeff Lynne, who recently joined the last version of The Move. So you had these three guys who'd been writing great songs, great material for The Move.
And in fact there was a little bit of a predecessor to the ELO when Tony Visconti, who produced David Bowie later on, he actually played the cello as well, and he would do string arrangements for The Move, which I think gave Roy Wood ideas of what he could carry on with.
I think the track Wild Tiger Woman by The Move, one of the ingredients that has been carried over to ELO is this. It's quite interesting. They have, for a band of that era, to use this chord, which is a diminished chord. So they're playing a sort of blues type of sequence. basically, you know, E to B to A, and then suddenly, which is very much Roy Wood, he puts in this E diminished. Now, if you transfer that to strings, you can hear a ELO in there. So there's the first thing that's been taken by Roy from the move and put into ELO.
What he wanted to do was follow the same route that the Beatles had followed with I Am the Walrus, to have strings involved in pop music to create something a bit different, not just overdubbed at the end of a song or put on by a producer who thought he was Phil Spector. What he wanted, was something that really could get the best of rock, the best of pop, the best of classical, mix it in together, and come up with maybe something that would be as big in the 70s as pop had been in the 60s.
Wasn't original necessarily. What was innovative was the fact that this was to be the first time someone had tried it en bloc rather than doing it on occasional songs. So he and Jeff Lynne developed the idea of the Electric Light Orchestra, and they came up with that by using as an experiment, a guinea pig if you want, one of the songs that Jeff Lynne had written for a Move B-side.
Roy Wood bought a cheap Chinese cello, and he decided that he'd have a fiddle about with this in the studio, so he played along with the finished track, or the work in progress track, and Jeff Lynne had said, hey, that's a good sound, why don't we try that? So 15 overdubs later, they had 10538 Overture.
It was the first of the Electric Light Orchestra saga, but the beginning of a completely different way to make a rock record, very commercial records, using strings, but not using strings as a mellow, smooth, cheesy sort of way, but using strings in a rhythmic, pushy, rocky way that actually were, in a way, sort of quite guitar-based.
One of 538 Overture as a first single starts with a complete lift from the Beatles' Dear Prudence. So that repeats, and then it goes to a G major chord. Then the next section, which is very much like ELO's own style of writing, it goes to a C major, to a C suspended fourth, to a G minor. Then it modulates, it goes up a tone to a D major, to a D suspended fourth, to an A minor, and then jumps to an E flat quickly, back to the introduction again. The strangest thing about this track is that it manages to marry something that you recognise, which is a Beatles riff, onto their own ideas. And of course, in a period in 1970 when, you know, anything went musically, you could try and join things together. So it sort of worked quite well in a sort of bizarre way, and nobody had really done anything quite like that before. So they were fresh.
Did you catch
Wood picked up the cello as being the way he wanted to drive ELO almost from day one. Why he chose it, only he can say, but it was a brilliant choice because it had a real power to it. It was a pop rock instrument in many respects, waiting to be discovered. And Roy Wood suddenly decided what we're going to do is make the cello the focus of our string section. We're not going to make it violin, we're not going to make it anything else that has a smoother, soothing, softer sound. We're going to go for aggression.
You brought a new meaning to cello playing, that's for sure. And I mean, even, you know, you see performance of them playing, he's rocking out with that cello. So again, you know, that's something no one had seen before.
You thought, this is Roy gone mad, he's lost it. And other people thought, absolutely brilliant, this is absolutely amazing. I thought it was Roy being a genius.
Guitar is a rhythm instrument, bass can be a rhythm instrument, so logically the cello can be. It can be plucked pizzicato or it can be bowed. And yes, they've used it a lot, and I think it to great effect actually within ELO.
I don't think that using the cello as a bass instrument was actually that effective. It created a sound, a tone colour, it created a sound, but it wasn't something that really pushed things along. It was more of a decoration to the sound as it was.
And it's not like picking out a kazoo or a banjo. You have to treat the instrument with respect, and yet, in a way, I suppose Roy was doing that, and he was introducing an instrument that might have got overlooked and forgotten. Certainly popularised it again and made people look at it in a different light. So it was nice to see him using an unusual instrument in a kind of pop rock context.
The basic string section of an orchestra is double basses, cellos, violas and violins. And what they would do was double track those, triple track those to make them sound like a huge string section. That was essentially it, although strangely enough on 10538 Overture they had a French horn as well. I think the only time that it was that predominant, mostly with ELO, it was a rhythm section and lots of strings and lots of vocals.
Roy's idea was to actually use an orchestra, but what he did do, because he was a guitarist, instead of actually doing string parts, because he played everything himself, he played cello, he played violins, and did everything himself. Because he did all that, he actually played it like a guitarist. You know, if you listen to the ELO singles, and if you listen to anything on ELO, it's not actually an orchestra. It's actually Roy's playing all this ding, 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 pushing stuff, and then all the little solo bits. It's all based around rock and rhythm and around what a guitarist would play.
They didn't try and bolt on an orchestra. They employed other musicians, violinists, etc., to be part of the whole package.
That's what makes it completely different. It's not like, let's have a rock band and put loads of strings around it, like Deep Purple did with an orchestra, or the Moody Blues did with an orchestra. It's nothing like that at all. It's a completely different attitude and a completely different thing.
They did with the 10538 Overture exactly what Roy Wood envisioned. They took what was a very basic, simple, very catchy pop song and just loaded it in with strings, especially cellos, and turned it into this classical pop piece, which was quite remarkable. They then took it to their then Move manager, Don Arden, the legendary Don Arden, and said, this is what we want to do. And apparently Arden's initial comment was, you've got to be joking, you're mad, this is never going to work. As soon as he heard 10538 Overture, he thought, this can work.
It sounded like the Beatles, so that's a pretty great thing to start off with. What was remarkable about the single was that it entered the charts at number 9, just as The Moves' California Man was leaving the charts.
Did you see him run? Did you see him
Some critics were a little bit sniffy about ELO. Perhaps they thought they were pretentious or rising above the station. And people had a tendency to be rather suspicious of any group that used strings. It's not always a popular thing to do, because you have this idea that, are they trying to be classical musicians? Are they trying to be, moving into this orchestral rock thing?
When ELO came out, it was a little different and a little innovative, because they were trying to be mainstream without trying to be artistic at the same time. So I think they did hit people a little bit square on the jaw with a sound that was, what is this? What are they trying to do? This is pop, but not as we know it, Jim. However, people started to realise that the underlying melody was so strong, it carried everything forward.
That first single proved that the public were ready to listen. If you could get the combination of a kind of a good striking theme and a good pop tune together with all this experimental stuff, then it worked.
It was a bit raw, but you could see what was going to come, or you could look back and see that was the starting point for a lot of the hits they had after that.
Well, for a first single from ELO, I think it was everything that everybody was expecting. The classical edge. It was certainly different, but I certainly wasn't expecting it to sound as Beatley as it did.
John Lennon himself actually said that if the Beatles had carried on what they would have been producing had they stayed together, was more or less what ELO produced. So if it had the master's seal of approval, I think that turned a lot of people on to listening to it. The difficulty for some people was that the Move had got themselves an identity, and the ELO was that a new group? Was it the Move in sheep's clothing? Nobody was really quite sure what to make of it at the time. And I think having John Lennon put his reputation behind it actually did them a lot of good.
Just trying to match acoustic, delicate, subtle instruments like a violin or a cello with a raucous drum kit and a powerful lead guitar is very, very difficult. So they set themselves high standards and a big task. It wasn't an easy ride for ELO, but they were convinced that they had something original and fresh to say.
Jeff Lynne says that if you could blow it, pluck it or bow it, Roy would play it. And if you look on that first ELO album, almost all the orchestral parts, bar I think they had a French horn player and they had a violinist. And then you had Bev Bevan on drums, Jeff Lynne vocals and guitar, and then Roy Wood vocals and everything else.
His one thing is overdub it to oblivion. If you're doing something once, you'll treble it. If you're doing something twice, you'll quadruple it. So, because he was onto 16 and 24 track when he made those records, if he wanted to have 4 pianos, he'd play one piano, then play another piano on top of it, another piano on top of it, and that gives a completely different sound to when you have 4 pianists. It tends to sound quite squashed and quite thin and quite small, but if you do it the right way, and if you have the right songs and the right ambience and things around it, it'll always sound very interesting.
He certainly had the ability to come up with interesting, almost cartoonish concepts and translate them into these sort of almost bad taste kind of extravaganzas, musical extravaganzas, in which you throw everything in. Fire bells ringing, violins, explosions, the 1812 Overture, anything, you just throw it in. It's a bit like a sort of manic Phil Spector in a way, a Birmingham Phil Spector.
There wouldn't have been an Electric Light Orchestra if it wasn't for Roy Wood and his ability with, a myriad of classical instruments that he brought into the studio. And there were times when he had to learn to play new instruments and odd little bits just to sort of complete the ideas that they had in their heads.
If Roy Wood had been American, we would be calling him the second Brian Wilson.
He came up with great ideas. He was the man really who drove the early ELO.
At the beginning, it was Roy Wood's project, it was Roy Wood's idea, and Jeff was coming along for the ride.
If you look at the early writing credits, it involved Jeff Lynne as much as it did Roy Wood. They were equal on the first album. If anything, I think Jeff Lynne might have more songwriting credits. But the innovation that was used in the first album very much was driven by Roy Wood's genius. It was he who came up with a lot of the ideas and the heaviness of the album. So Jeff Lynne's own ideas and the way to present songs perhaps were overshadowed by Roy Wood's personality, Roy Wood's vision and Roy Wood's enthusiasm.
Who was going to get the limelight? Was it going to be Roy Wood, who'd achieved so much with the first version of The Move, and Jeff Lynne, who joined the band later and was clearly a great talent and burgeoning writer, somebody who wanted to express himself. So between Roy and Jeff, there was always going to be a bit of rivalry and probably arguments about the musical direction.
The next one is part of a long line of Jeff's songs that he can't think of titles for. Is Jeff's Boogie 1 to 13, and this is Jeff's Boogie number 2.
It's very easy to see, you can spot the Jeff Lynne song and you can spot the Roy Wood song. So they both obviously had their own idea for what the band was going to be like. And to a certain extent, it was almost like ne'er the twain shall meet.
Jeff's Boogie number 2, the title doesn't really rank up there with the 100 greatest song titles of all time. But Jeff Lynne was in the habit of creating a lot of different songs, riffs, pieces of music, and obviously he didn't bother to give them the titles until he knew that something was going to happen to them. Now, Jeff's Boogie number 2 didn't actually make it onto the first album. It was a piece that they played live, so I think what we do is look at it and say, would it have deserved a place on the first album? And the answer, to be honest, is probably no. It's not got the finished quality of a song that's been thought through all the way through. It's a little bit staccato, jumpy, but then ELO songs perhaps were then.
This is, you know, it's got some good bits, but it's going all over the place as far as I was concerned. Yeah, Boogie 2, it's a bit of a strange old brew, that one.
It's hard to understand because Jeff Lynne is a fantastic songwriter and Roy Wood is a brilliant songwriter. So why, they must have had loads and loads of great songs lying around. Why do they do things like that? I mean, don't understand it.
The fact that we've got that down on film is obviously a plus because it shows you the way that Jeff's mind was working.
Bev Bevan is an incredibly underrated performer. He's the third arm, if you will, of the early ELO. He was with The Move, with Lynne and with Wood, and when those two decided to start this new experiment, they took Bev Bevan with them. And there's a reason for that, because Bev Bevan is an excellent drummer. He can be heavy, he worked with Black Sabbath, he can be subtle, he can be light, he can be orchestral, but he's never been given the credit he deserves because he doesn't have a profile. He's always, oh, that bloke at the back just bashing away, but he remains one of the most crucial elements of the whole Electric Light Orchestra sound.
The one thing about a drummer in a band that size is you have to be a very powerful drummer, and Bev is. You also have to be rather like a conductor in a band of that size, especially live. You are giving musical cue points within a song. Someone like Bev would give a signal, okay, a little fill going into the chorus or whatever. So he was like a conductor. He was the engine room of a band of that size, and perfect really for the band.
The greatest thing he does add is that he doesn't get in the way. He doesn't want to be a soloist, he doesn't want to be a star, he just wants to play the drums.
I don't think with the ELO he was necessarily called upon to pull out all the stops on every song, because clearly the focus was elsewhere. But the fact is, he came up in the John Bonham school of drumming. He's one of these drummies who learns how to hit things at an early age, and he channeled all that energy into drumming.
You see my news and you rattle my brain. Too much love does a man insane. You broke my will, oh what a thrill. Goodness gracious, great balls of fire. You came along and you took all of my money. You came along and woo me, honey. I changed my mind, this love is fine. Goodness gracious, great balls of fire. Kiss me, baby. Oh, feels good. Hold me, baby, yeah. I wanna love you like love should. You're fine, so kind. Wanna tell this world that you're mine. Take my dignity.
ELO tackled lots of things that people, critics certainly, were a bit bemused by. I mean, for example, doing a version of Jerry Lee Lewis's classic rock and roll tune, Great Balls of Fire. Is that a good idea to do in the 70s? I'm not too sure, because people had their firm memories of the original.
Came along and you took all of my money. You came along and woo me, honey. I changed my mind, this love is fine. Goodness gracious, great balls of fire.
This particular song is a rock and roll classic, and they pretty much just tipped the hat to it. So yeah, I mean, they did a good job basically. I think they loved the song, and I think that comes across in their overall production. Of course, they added, the bigger sound with the strings and all that sort of stuff. But essentially, they're holding true to Jerry Lee Lewis's song.
It's not a very easy song to do, because it's one of those covers that is always overshadowed by the original, because the original is based so much on Jerry Lee Lewis's own personality and flamboyance. So when ELO tried to do it, they didn't do it justice because they were overshadowed by the original.
Feels good. Hold me, baby. I wanna love you like love should. You're fine, so kind. Wanna tell this world that you're mine.
Obviously, when a band starts its career, it may not have enough music to play a whole set. Great Balls of Fire serves almost as not only stuffing in the set, but it also perhaps gives the listener an idea of what ELO are trying to do, because as you know the song, you can separate the song from the treatment. This was very much a prototype of the kind of arrangement that Jeff Lynne would be doing on Roll Over Beethoven a year hence.
I can understand Roll Over Beethoven, because Beethoven, string players, rock band, I get that. I get that combination. You've got string players, you've got the word Beethoven, you've got a rock band. Oh, that's good. Makes sense to me. Great Balls of Fire, why? It's a piano song, it's a rock song. What's it got to do with strings? It's either that or they just didn't have enough material, and that's weird because you're talking about Roy Wood and Jeff Lynne, two of the greatest songwriters around.
I think it was probably the best left in its original format.
Queen of the Hours is one of those songs that was a very good pop tune. Typical of Jeff Lynne at the time, he wrote a very simple pop number. It could have been the Beatles, it could have been the Stones. But then what they did was, right, once they had the basic stuff and structure down, they loaded it up with strings and so forth. And it worked really well. That seemed to be the way they were operating at the time, which is to get the song done, get the basis done, get the, if you want, the rock instrumentation or pop instrumentation in place, and then think, okay, how can we overload this? And throw in all manner of styles and all manner of instrumentation from the classical end.
Because of the period that it was recorded in, I think it had some unusual influences. It had sort of Eastern music influences, you know, Indian music influences in there.
If there was a track that perhaps put the ELO in the Beatles frame, that was it. It really is I Am the Walrus backwards in certain respects.
I think it also had some influences that were around at that point which were not musical, were pharmaceutical, called LSD, because there's a rather odd section in the middle. But in those days anything went, and it worked for the time.
If it does sound as if it owes a little bit to the Fab Four, well, maybe that's no bad thing.
Like any band, when they form, they have to find their feet, and this was a track where they were finding their feet, and certain ingredients from Queen of the Hours stayed with ELO right through their career, and other ingredients went like, okay, not so good, let's remove that.
There are bands that take music on the road before they record it. And yes, that sometimes does mean that you come up with a far better finished product. If you've been able to see how it goes down in front of a live audience, you can refine it, you can work out what works and what hasn't. Certainly with ELO, it was the reverse formula, because you had to create really in the studio, but then start worrying about how you're going to reproduce it live, which is certainly, if you have to do it one way round, that's probably not the preferred way.
ELO live were a strange concoction, because they looked odd. Certainly in the early days, Roy Wood looked like a crazed eccentric. He could have been the professor from Back to the Future. He looked so mad and so wild-eyed, and it was him who carried the whole thing to some extent visually in those early days. Everybody else held back, but of course the big hanging point was the fact that you had this lineup of cellists on stage. What was going on? This was Baroque, this was chamber music, this was orchestral, but this was still pop music.
It's what, 9-10 people in the band. It's something that people hadn't really seen before on stage. That's for sure. You know, cellos, violins, and a rock band to go with it. So, in that respect, it was innovative and original.
I saw them playing at a concert. I think it was one of the early rock festivals, back in the mist of time. But poor old ELO were battling the elements and all the things that go on at rock festivals, like bad sound and wind blowing and music sheets blowing away in the breeze. And sound mixers pulling their hair out trying to get it all together. So it's very difficult to kind of get that stuff across live.
Some of the headlines that ELO got for the chaotic performances they put on, one in Croydon in particular, I think was more or less the death knell of that group, because the reviewer couldn't hear what was going on, because back in those days contact microphones, pickups didn't really exist. And the other problem they had was that Roy Wood on record was playing 4 or 5 different things. So obviously having him belting around from cello to oboe to whoever knows what else was a little bit of a logistical nightmare. So heaven help the poor sound man with what he had to deal with. I don't think the results live of the first ELO were ever really much to write home about.
How could they recreate that sound on stage without having all the string instruments there, without having 25 string players? Synthesizers were beginning to be developed that were allowing them to recreate, to a certain extent, the sound of strings. But it wasn't very early in their career. So once it hit a bit of success in America, that's when the live shows really started kicking in for them. They were able to use 2 or 3 keyboard players and some real live string players, and they got away with it sounding as close as damn it to the records. But in the very early days, there wasn't a lot happening live.
This one's from the Electric Light Orchestra album. It's supposed to be a hymn type thing. On the album we did it with a choir. We couldn't afford it tonight, so this one's called Whisper in the Night.
Whispers in the Night is very definitely a Roy Wood track. You wouldn't mistake it for anyone else, and in many ways it does hark back to the Move in the kind of sound it has. So I would say it's an inventive track. It was one that had elements that you would recognise if you were a Move fan, but also it was trying to move forward in the way that the ELO were doing.
Whisper in the Night, that was a bit girlified for me, and therefore I didn't have much time in my life for it. So Whisper in the Night, I'm sure it's a lovely way to end an album, but not my cup of tea.
It's sort of sad on the one hand and Christmassy on the other. It's really quite unusual. And I think it sounds a bit like, to me, that he had an idea for a song and brought it to the table, and nobody else maybe had a particular piece of material at that time, so they put it together and saw what they got. Not one of their better moments, I would say.
It was a really good song, and they put on a very angelic choir, very heavenly choir, and a beautifully arranged string operation as well, which made it into something slightly different than the norm. It took it away from the norm. It's very close in many respects to what the Beatles had done about 5 years previously on Sgt. Pepper. And it wouldn't have been out of place in Sgt. Pepper. It's one of the best songs on the first album.
It was a bit sort of moody, but not in not in a sort of dark, meaningful moody. It was insipid, I think is the word I'm searching for. Quite an odd song, actually. If you heard it now, you might not associate it immediately with ELO. You'd probably say, who's that? Whereas lots of other ELO songs, you immediately know it's ELO just by their overall sound.
It's very easy now to look back at the lyrics and think, was Roy Wood writing his valedictory letter to the band? Because it's always all about saying goodbye to a loved one. Maybe you can read too much into it these days, but given the fact he wasn't to be around for very much longer in ELO, you do start to think, was he already having second thoughts about carrying on with this band?
I still remember to this day, first time hearing the first ELO album, and all of me and my mates was going like, it's the Beatles. It's the goddamn Beatles.
The Beatles' influence, I think, almost that's really did come from Jeff Lynne. I think history has shown that the guy's a Beatles fan. No need to apologise for that. The Beatles were one of the best bands that have ever existed. But I mean the fact that Lynne ended up producing new Beatles material on Anthology, worked with George Harrison on the last couple of records that George ever made. Was with George in the Travelling Wilburys, and there was the overt Beatlesness of the classic period ELO, the sort of the 70s period ELO. That's what Jeff kind of brought in to the mix, where Roy might have brought the more quirky classical ideas.
In a while, I see their floodlights burning. I hear the band play on. Now Mary takes her.
I know a lot of people accuse Jeff Lynne of being like John Lennon, but I don't think Jeff ever went out to sound like John Lennon. He comes from Northern England, so did John. He's got a sound of his voice. I don't think it's ever on purpose.
I don't think that ELO were overly influenced by the Beatles, but they were heavily influenced by the Beatles. They took that as a starting point. What Roy Wood did, and let's give Roy Wood the credit for being the main visionary in the early days, what he did on that first album was to ensure they used Sgt. Pepper as a starting point, and then said, well, what would happen if, and then projected out from there. So Sgt. Pepper was a starting point, and a heavily influential starting point, but it wasn't the be-all and end-all.
It was a love of the music, and it does sound great, there's no doubt about it, and it was sort of wrapped around their songs, so it wasn't as if they were just stealing the songs, they weren't doing that. But there's no doubt, that ELO would never have sounded like ELO without the Beatles.
Early ELO just reeked of the Beatles. Every song you can more or less take apart and say that's the Beatles, maybe apart from what was it? The Battle of Marston Moor, that was it. July the 2nd, 1644, which was a faux medieval romp.
My Lord King, who stood to betray your own people, and even in the eyes of God do you not relent. I am therefore bound by no other cause. I shall raise
little army. Together we will march against you and your kind. And every born man will fight to regain his own freedom and cleanse his wretched soul.
The Electric Light Orchestra first album, it certainly wasn't the answer to everyone's prayers, but it had enough in it to suggest that had they made a second album with that same lineup, what they'd have come up with would have been far nearer the finished article, far nearer a real combination of rock and the classics.
The first ELO album was a very good debut album for the one simple and obvious fact: it was different. It was a completely different thing.
It's an interesting album. It's an enjoyable album in places. It's a fun album in places, but it's not a great debut album.
The first album was still trying to find their feet and maybe pushing and pulling between the different dynamics that were in the band as songwriters.
What's also funny is that the ELO first album was called No Answer in America, and the reason for that was because a secretary at United Artists had been asked to phone the UK office to find out what the album was going to be called, and there was nobody in the UK office, so she just wrote on a piece of paper, no answer, which some genius then saw later on, and hence the album was called No Answer in America.
For me, the whole of the first album, the material took second place to the actual sound. That they were more interested in getting the sound together, getting the orchestration thing and the whole vibe of it together. I can take that, except for the fact is, when you're a listener and when you're listening to an album you've bought, the one thing that makes you listen to it is the material. And I think the greatest weakness in that first album is the material. I don't think it's great.
And there's stuff you listen to and you just think, well, what on earth were they doing here? You know, and there's some stuff that just sounds so sort of baroque and bizarre, you know, that you just wonder how they thought they were going to get away with it. But overall, you know, it's the blueprint for you know, the fantastic rock band that they were going to become.
Some of the most important ingredients they had was Jeff Lynne and Roy Wood's vocals were good sounding, they were good singers, and they were interested in lots of harmonies, and so it was poppy, but it was this big sound.
It was heavy, it had a baroque style, something slightly surreal about it, and was more adventurous than they ever were to be again. And it's a great introduction. It certainly took a few people by surprise.
My dad was sat in the corner reading his Racing Post, and his ears pricked up, and he looked up and said, "What the hell is this you're listening to?" It's like, "Oh, it's ELO, Dad." It's like, and he didn't make one of his disparaging comments like, and so I took that as a thumbs up, and I know that he liked his orchestral pieces, and I think that's probably, you know, an indication that it did have orchestral qualities that even my old man, you know, found quite appealing.
Apart from using, you know, a brass section, which they used sparingly in places, you couldn't really, you know, a couple of glockenspiels and triangles thrown in. It was big, you know, and logistically it was a big job to record it, you know. Recording sessions in those days were a bit trial and error sometimes, and sometimes you kept a take that maybe wasn't the most solid tempo-wise, but was the best feel-wise.
In a strange way, despite the ambition and innovation that Roy Wood was trying to introduce, they were the anathema of prog rock, because prog rock was very much influenced by classical respect the prog rock musicians were into writing huge pieces, great swathes of music, which drew on pretentious twaddle, if you want, or pretentious culture, however you want to put it. ELO were about pop.
They had pop hits, but they weren't a pop band, right? They have always been a progressive rock band. They might have been more progressive when they started, like most prog bands are.
I think ELO thought that, in the true word of the word progressive, they thought that they were being progressive because they were progressing from the move and taking the music to what they thought was, you know, the natural progression. But as for prog rock, no, I don't think they were prog rock. It's more free-form pop.
Progressive rock, as far as I was concerned, had closer links with the jazz tradition, whereas I don't think ELO did. They were more, obviously, the sort of pseudo-classical influences, use of Beethoven themes, that sort of thing, in a pop context, which was fun and artistically satisfying in its own way, but I would never have called them a progressive rock band.
Early ELO was definitely the mixture of the two styles, of Roy's style and Jeff's style, working together. But you can also hear their styles separately. And Jeff's, you know, in songs that were written together, you can definitely, Jeff's stamp is there, musical stamp is there. And that's what took over the band after Roy had left. Logically, of course.
When the pair started Electric Light Orchestra, they were equal partners, but it was an equal partnership that never really sat comfortably with either of them. They both wanted to be number one. And things apparently reached such a bad state that when ELO went on tour and played in Italy, there was an infamous gig when it was announced by the promoter that ELO would not be playing that night, and no reason was given. The problem was backstage. Lynne and Wood had fallen out as to who should actually be the first to step foot on stage. Both wanted to be ahead of the other. That was how crazy it had gotten.
On ELO's first album, Jeff Lynne and Roy Wood came up with all the songs, rather like Lennon and McCartney. And as with Lennon and McCartney, they couldn't necessarily satisfy their own needs within that format.
Because Roy always wanted to control the production and the sound and the writing, the rest of the band found it very hard to deal with. And I think I think it's very hard to work with Roy because he wants to do everything, he wants to write it all, he wants to play it all, he wants to sing it all. Only because he's very talented, it's enthusiasm. He does trust people and he does appreciate people, it's just his pure enthusiasm for working and for making a sound.
It had obviously fallen apart in terms of the relationship. Jeff Lynne was going to leave or be booted out, Roy Wood would take complete control. But such as the character of Roy Wood, he got bored with it all and said, no, I've got another idea, let Jeff Lynne have this is old hat, I'll move on and form Wizard.
Once he'd done the Electric Light Orchestra, he'd done the album, he was bored. To him it was over, he'd done this. That's why I always think the first Electric Light Orchestra album is Roy Wood's solo orchestrated album, because as soon as Roy Wood got bored and Jeff Lynne took up the baton and he developed it.
You made a fool of me, but them broken dreams have got to end.
Jeff Lynne probably found greater freedom without the competition from Roy, so he would be able to focus his energy and ideas.
ELO were led by Jeff Lynne. Bev Bevan was his right-hand man. Richard Tanley, I suppose, to his left. You know, and then, you know, an array of new musicians came in that he felt could project the sound that he thought ELO should have.
Jeff thought again, he said, well, okay, how am I going to approach this? Roy's gone, we don't need to have some madman dashing around playing 5 instruments in one song. Let's simplify it a bit. I do the guitar and the vocals, I write the song, and then we add in the other bits as we go along, rather than try and have this forced clash, if you like, of the pop and the classical, which is what Roy found so exciting.
it certainly did become a different beast. I mean, that was it. It was Jeff Lynne. It was Jeff Lynne's baby then, and basically, you know, he took it in the direction that he wanted to.
Many critics and probably the fans and probably the manager thought, oh my God, the band's doomed. You know, they're going to fail. But they did a new album, ELO 2, after Roy went, and then they had enormous success in America.
It's so good that you're feeling pain, but you better get your face on both the very next train.
For the first time, Jeff Lynne became the main songwriter in a band of national and international stature. And he rose to it magnificently, because he was a great songwriter. Like Roy Wood, he wrote wonderful pop songs. The difference is, Jeff Lynne locked everything down. The experimentation, the adventure, the innovation that Roy Wood had begun with the first album was suddenly sidelined. Jeff Lynne decided what we're going to do is make pop rock music with soothing, smooth use of orchestration.
His Electric Light Orchestra is a continuation of Roy's idea, done much better. More lush, much more commercial, much more slick, much more obvious sort of piece of saleable product.
Bev Bevan was still drumming, and we still had Jeff Lynne singing, writing, playing guitar. But the band that ended up was really a rock band with the odd string or two here and there.
One can never argue with what the ELO achieved. However, they never fulfilled the potential and ambition that Roy Wood showed in those early days. And that's because Jeff Lynne, I don't think, totally believed in it. He wanted to use classical influences for pop reasons to get commercial hits, and he wrote some of the greatest songs of the 70s.
Very often when people come up with an idea and one person gets bored and the other one doesn't, there's a real bit of animosity. But for some reason, when Roy got bored with it and decided not to carry on, and Jeff took it on, they just shook hands and went their own way. It always seemed to be a really pleasant divorce, which is very unusual in rock.
I think the fact that Roy and Jeff are still on speaking terms, and the fact they're still mates, I don't think we'll have them together again in our lifetime, but it would be nice to think that they can look back on the early work and say, well, we did something there that was worth doing.